All right. So let's move on to the Montreal Canadiens. And by the way, the statement, I'm not particularly proud of that basically typifies beer league hockey. So, I mean, you got it right there in a nutshell. The Montreal Canadiens, it has seemed all year like a foregone conclusion that Ben Sherratt's being traded for a first round pick from very early on this year. But now you've already mentioned some options for a team looking for that style of defenseman. Do you think that teams are still going to be willing to pay that price come trade deadline?
Yeah, I think so. I think Sherratt is a guy that a lot of teams are interested in. There's multiple teams after him. So I've got to believe that somebody will probably ante up that. Having said that, the point I would make on Montreal with Jeff Gorton and Kent Hughes there now, if you look in, they've already been even though they went to the Stanley Cup final last year, they were doing sort of a rebuild on the fly in Montreal. So Bergevin and when Trevor Timmins was the chief scout there, they were accruing just a ridiculous in each of the last 2-3 years at least. Yeah. They were going in just locked and loaded with like 10, 11, 12 picks in the draft in each year's draft. They were having in some of those years they had 2 and 3 and 4 second round picks. So the Canadiens have made a lot of draft picks, and I'm not saying they're not interested in first round picks, but I think they're starting to. I think Kent Hughes, in the very short time that he's been there, has identified. Let's see if we can find some 20, 21, 22-year-old guys who are on the verge of stepping into the lineup as NHL players. And so one of the rumors that we've seen that's been out there everywhere was, Calgary's interested in Ben Sherratt. The name that's out there as a possible return that Montreal wants, but Calgary isn't prepared to give him up, is Jacob Pelletier.
Yeah.
And I can't remember if Pelletier was a first round pick. I seem to think if he wasn't a first, he was a second, but and he's playing in their farm team right now. But I think that's the approach. There's another guy in Minnesota, Jack McBain, Andrew McBain's son, who's playing at Boston College right now, and he's potentially can call his own shot in terms of graduating just graduate from Boston College this summer and become a free agent later in the summer. Looks like Minnesota will probably trade him. So I could see where a team like Montreal would want get a guy like McBain. They would want to get a guy like Pelletier. And so a Sherratt deal doesn't necessarily have to include a first round pick if the prospect they're getting back is the equivalent of a first round pick and that much closer to playing in the NHL.
Right. So with Jack McBain, I guess the thing is that, you might be tempted to say, well, why not just, you've gone this far, go the distance. But then he's not going to be playing this year. He won't be able to burn a year off his contract this year. He'd have to wait till next year in order to do that. Anyways, so I guess that's kind of where you have to be thinking if you're trying to get Jack McBain, you get him in this year and start things right away.
Yeah, and you get and McBain, from McBain's perspective, he still would be getting to call a shot because no one's going to trade for him unless they know he's going to sign with them. And so he just gets an early head start on free agency.
Yeah. I don't get the high price for Ben Sherratt myself, Bob. I don't quite understand it. I was talking to Jim Nill last night actually, and they've had their sort of issues with John Klingberg. They're almost certainly going to keep him unless they get a deal that's like out of this world, and then try and re-sign him. He said that the whole trade request was a little bit overblown and that he still wants to stay in Dallas. So I would suspect they're going to hang on to him and see what they can do with him in the playoffs this year. But I mean, for goodness sake, if Ben Sherratt is getting what people are talking about, I can only imagine if Klingberg ever went on the market, what you'd get for that.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think if Dallas was gonna trade Klingberg, they would want to get a first round pick, prospect, and probably the old three. Everybody at trade deadline,
the three prongs,
the three pieces. First round pick, which sometimes becomes a second round pick, a high level prospect, which sometimes becomes a mid level prospect, and then some sort of secondary piece, which is sometimes a lower level player, sometimes a lower level prospect, or sometimes a lower level draft pick. But yeah, so Klingberg would fetch that kind of thing. But with the Stars being shorthanded and the mono forcing Heiskanen out of the lineup, you're right about that. But in terms of Sherratt, I mean, it's the deadline. People overpay at the deadline. And if you're getting a very specific need, and what have we seen? And I know people will pull out the analytics on a player like Sherratt, or say he doesn't do this or he doesn't do that, and that. But the reality is, yeah, there you go. Well, and I hear all that, but every time you look at a Stanley Cup winner, they're loaded with 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", big, strong defensemen who can defend and can offer some physical play. Yep. And whether it's the St. Louis Blues, basically every team that wins the cup, you look at the size of their blue line and you look at the bite that they've got. Yep. And so they're, and let's be honest. I mean, if a team like the Calgary Flames or somebody else who really wants Ben Sherratt, they've got a niche for him on that team where they've already got the puck movers and the guys whose analytics are off the charts. So it gives you a dimension that you feel like you otherwise may be lacking. And if you're desperate to win the cup and win it now, then there are teams that will pay a premium for a player like that.
I'm just not sure you don't get almost that much in a guy like Justin Braun for a lot less.
Yeah, some people might make that argument, and we'll see what
you wouldn't, I guess, but I am.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe right. You may be right. Hey, McKenny, I told you I'm a hockey outsider. I've only watched about a half a dozen games this season.
You're selling yourself short. I know it, Bob. You're still the man. Go ahead, Dylan.
It's funny that you say that because I gave Ken the moniker hockey outsider when we first started this podcast. Yeah. But moving on, just lastly about the Montreal Canadiens, it seems like almost every name on the team is in trade rumors right now, which almost seems crazy because so many of them have a lot of term left. Like you're hearing Jeff Petrie right now, which is like, I'm not even sure that he's started his next contract yet. So who do you think is actually likely to be moved for this trade deadline, and who do you think is more of an off-season situation?
Well, I think you're right to the extent, Montreal is not in a position where they absolutely have to do anything other than the guys they might want to move that are on expiring contracts, and Petrie still got some term, obviously. And Petrie, he would look favorably on a move, and Montreal would look favorably on getting it done. But, I think some of the teams that would want Petrie would want Montreal to retain salary, and they might not be too keen on doing that and that. But, if they get the right deal, there's no doubt in my mind they'll move Petrie. Outside of that, I mean, let's look at my list here for a second. We heard some Lehkonen trade rumors for a while, but I think, as a relatively younger player.
And he's been really good lately. He's been really good.
He's been really good. Yeah. So unless they knock it out of the park there, in terms of the return they're going to get, there's no pressure to trade a guy like Lehkonen. And after that, I mean, there was, I think, a lot of trade talk or trade rumors on social media for guys like Hoffman and Dvorak and what have you. I'm not convinced that those are deals that we could expect or reasonably think are going to happen by Monday.
Yeah.
The other guy would be that there'll be some demand for just again because every team wants defensemen and guys that can play. Is Kulak would be another guy in Montreal that some teams would be calling on. And again, you're not in a position where you're obliged to trade him, but you can if you want.
Yeah, that's Artturi Mike Bossy Lehkonen right now.
Well, he's been miscast his entire career, in my opinion. And it looks like Marty St. Louis at least willing to give him the opportunity to exploit his offensive game a little more. I just don't know if he has the set of hands. Maybe he's lost them. Maybe, he's gone so long as a checker, he's lost his hands, but I don't know that he has the hands to be able to finish plays. But I mean, he's certainly got the ability to create those opportunities. Yeah. Whether he cashes in on them is another thing, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree. He was shooting from a lot further out earlier in his career and getting a lot of goals that way. But there's been a joke on Habs Twitter, which is like a sign that goes, "Are you Artturi Lehkonen?" It's got 2 boxes, yes and no. And there's a bunch of X's around the yes box.
That's pretty good, actually.
The disgruntled fan bases are always the most funny fan bases, right? It's why Leafs Twitter is always so fun as well. And Vancouver Twitter, well, okay, that can just be evil at times.
Yeah.